Hello, my name is Sefideh, and today I will be presenting on the question: does Australia need a constitutionally enshrined Indigenous voice to Parliament? In this presentation, I will examine both sides of the debate, focusing on power, representation and Indigenous sovereignty. I would like to begin by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land on which I'm presenting today, the Bodarong people. I recognize their ongoing connection to land, water and community, and I pay my respects to elders past and present. This issue is not only a political debate, it raises deeper question about how power is structured in Australia and whose knowledge is recognised. Scholars such as Seth and Wolf argues that the system established during colonisation continues to shape institutions today. In Australia, colonisation involved both the occupation of the land and the denial of Indigenous sovereignty. As McGlade explains, sovereignty was never ceded. Although the Constitution allows the government to make law for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, inequality remains, as shown in Closing the Gap reports. This raises an important question. Is inequality caused by the lack of representation, or does it reflect deeper structural conditions shaped by colonization? This presentation argues that while the voice may improve representation, it does not fully address these underlying structural issues. One argument in favor of the voice is that Indigenous people have historically been excluded from political decision making despite their sovereignty. Prior to colonization, Indigenous societies maintained complex system of governance, law and knowledge grounded in connection to country. However, colonization disturbed this system. Aboriginal children were placed into missionaries and government schools, often separated from their families and removed from the cultural learning environment. This shows that colonial power operates not only through land disposition but also through control of knowledge and identity. From this perspective, power is maintained through controlling representation and whose knowledge is valued. This helps explain why policies such as Closing the Gap aim to reduce inequality, yet outcome remains uneven. In this context, the voice can be understood as an attempt to include Indigenous knowledge and lived experiences in decision making. It may strengthen participation and self-determination. However, it does not restore sovereignty and continue to operate within existing political structure. So while the voice may improve representation, it does not fundamentally shift where power sits. However, there are strong arguments that the voice may not lead to meaningful structural changes. This key issue is not whether Indigenous voices should be heard, but whether an adversary body can influence decision-making power. Indigenous disadvantage is shaped by interconnected issues such as health, education, housing, and justice. These are often described as wicked problems, meaning that cannot be solved through a single reform. Historical evidence also shows that inclusion does not always lead to equality. Even when Indigenous people were included in institutions such as education, they were often placed in a separate system and removed from their cultural learning. This shows that participation within a system does not necessarily lead to control within that system. From this perspective, the limitation of the voice is that it may provide a platform for advice without changing decision-making authority. Research shows that constitution can be symbolic when government are not required to act on recommendation. Policy framework often remain controlled by government priorities, even when Indigenous perspectives are included. This means Indigenous voice may be heard but not necessarily acted upon. As a result, the voice risks reinforcing existing power structure rather than transforming them. The central issue in this debate is the relationship between representation and power. The argument of voice focuses on inclusion and participation, while the argument against it highlights the limits of representation without structural changes. Post-colonial theory helps explain this tension, showing that even when systems appear to change, underlying power structure can still remain. This suggests that the key issue is not simply whether Indigenous voices are included, but whether they can influence decision making in meaningful way. This creates tension between recognizing and sovereignty. While the voice may improve representation, it does not fully address Indigenous authority within the Australian state. Meaningful change requires not only inclusion but also accountability and power sharing. In conclusion, the Indigenous Voice to Parliament may improve representation, but it is not a complete solution to inequality. The debate highlights the Indigenous disadvantage is shaped by the deeper structural condition linked to colonization and sovereignty. While the voice may support participation, its effectiveness depends on whether governments are willing to act on Indigenous knowledge and share decision-making power. Ultimately, meaningful change requires both representation and structural transformation. Thank you.